Hello,
No,
and welcome to Aussie Craft Distillers Shooting the Shit. I'm Luke. Hello.
I'm Todd.
Uh, we've got Todd, as per usual. Crafty is not here. He's not even replying to my texts, so he's obviously busy as. So we'll carry on without him. Uh, Topher, hi.
Yes. Hi. Thank you very much for
Uh,
having me.
no worries. Thank
You're
you
welcome.
for joining us, Topher, from, of course, Wildflower uh, Brewing and Blending,
Mhm.
Wildflower Beer, in Sydney, in Marrickville, in the heart of Brew Central.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's definitely become that. I started working there in 2013 in Marrickville, and it was the first brewery to call Marrickville home. Batch was, and
Yep.
now, I mean, Young Henry's had started, of course, not too long before, maybe a year or two before. Up in Newtown. But
Mm.
yeah, you really can't go anywhere in America without tripping on some sort of alcohol production anymore.
Absolutely. Anyone would think that Marrickville was home of the drunk, but I think we keep it under wraps fairly well.
Well,
So
you're not
you're
too
one of
far.
the. So you're one of the first. You're one of the Marrickville brewery pioneers, then I guess.
I mean, I've always been around it. Like, I didn't start Batch. It wasn't my brewery, but I was the first
Mm.
employee there.
Yep.
And worked and developed most of the recipes that they still brew. I
Mm.
think, I mean, I haven't had my feet in the water there for at least 6 years, so maybe longer. So I'm not sure if the recipes are the same or not. But yeah, it was
Yeah.
exciting
Right.
just to start
Okay.
brewing. I didn't have a background, I don't have a background in brewing or distilling. Like, it wasn't what I studied, but it's certainly what I got into from a sort of interest in raw materials, I suppose.
Mm.
Just making things from scratch. But
Mm.
those days of craft beer, if anyone can cast their mind back to 10 years ago of booze, it was really that rejection period of beer. It was there was light lager, Aussie draft was kind of around, and particularly driven by the US trends of that rejection of lager. And so we
Mm.
went we went we went 180, right, and went hard into hops and ABV and adjuncts, which some of that stuff still remains. Like, high ABV beers are still quite popular in the
Mm.
craft beer world, but there's a lot more palatable, enjoyable, everyday drinkers, I would say, now than there were in 2013, from my opinion.
I find beer interesting because that was my lead into spirits
Mm,
personally, and it's always it seems to me that the evolution of beer is very rapid. A new thing comes on the market, an idea from the states comes in, and then all of a sudden we've got it,
mhm,
and that happens within the space of months to a year or so.
yeah.
Sours was a big one.
Mhm,
Obviously, the IPAs when they first hit, everyone went for the IPA. Then the
mhm.
hazies came in and all that sort of thing. Um, it's a different world for the world of spirits, which is generally where we're focused. We've
Same.
got such a long lead time generally.
Yeah.
Um, I think the distilling world doesn't really have an appreciation for how quickly beer moves.
It works against us as well, and I have a huge amount of respect and admiration for winemakers and distillers because of that
Mm,
consistency, like the need for um, like continual and iterative growth rather than like generate like epoch changing growth like
mm,
every quarter, which happened. Some breweries were growing 20% quarter on
mm,
quarter. Like, it's not so much happening anymore, but like the growth was so expansive, and also the ability to make more widgets, if you will, in production. Let's talk about, like, or in manufacturing, you talk about widgets. You can just make more widgets in beer, buy more liters, and just sell
mm,
them really, really quickly. And that
mm,
desire is there for a lot of brewers because, they see sales going one way and they're like, great, we can just ramp this up. But sometimes that doesn't always come with the kind of internal introspection of whether or not they should be growing, or whether the way that they're growing is in keeping with the core values of their product, or whether their product's actually the same once it grows. Sometimes things change. So it's fun, not using this as directly as a foray into talking about the product that we're talking about, but like in one aspect, the reality that things move quite slowly in distilling is something that makes what we've made in this whiskey quite interesting and different without me knowing. Like, honestly, this wasn't an intentional thing, but because had I gone about going through this intentionally, we would have done it differently. But the fact that it has gone through the way it has actually ended up making the product that it is. But not to foreshadow that too much. But at the same time, I've always looked at the distilling industry, and I have a lot of friends because of the interconnection between raw materials, between beer and whiskey, for example. But whiskey, of friends in the distilling industry and vineyards for that ability to look into the future and keep on their true north, let's say, and not like I kind of, I guess, stay focused on, I guess, on their navel a little bit, which also can be myopic. Like, you can also you put your blinders on a bit too much, but there's goods and bads of both. But you're exactly right. Like, it's a beer industry really has seen a dramatic amount of shift and growth. And you're right. I mean, that ability to move on a dime and follow a trend is there. And I mean, I don't do it with what I do necessarily at Wildflower. Because we think about things on a bit of a longer term basis. But it's tempting.
Well, before we go any further, we do like to have a bit of a drink while we're talking. Sure. Todd, what's in your glass?
Well, I've actually just poured what Topher's about to pour into his glass, I hope.
Yeah.
Which is
coincidentally a nice little sample.
Excellent.
That was generously given.
For my pre-game, though, I have already had a couple because I've been sitting here working.
After that, I'm probably going to follow it up with the Starwood Stout cast.
Nice.
Because there's not much.
So I've been working through my Warbs Harbour a bit more because it's just lovely jubbly. So I've already had a couple of them. Just a couple. And also a little bit of the Coastal Stone, the new blended from Manly. So
is that for Manly Spirits?
Yeah, so that's their new their new blend.
Yep.
Which is, it's a 40%. It's a 700 ml bottle for $80.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is meant with this gorgeous bottle.
Yeah.
Johnny Walker, eat your fucking heart out, really.
Yeah. Yeah. How long has that been on the market?
Drinking.
Very easy. It's only just come out in the last week.
Have they released whiskies before? Sorry, forgive my ignorance here.
No. Yeah, they have. They've also got.
So they have their Coastal Stone range. That would show.
Yep.
Oh right, yeah, okay. Oh, it's
and
a whole range. Yeah,
so again, they've got their beautiful bottle, but they're only 500 ml bottles, and certainly something that sets Manly apart is that gorgeous bottle, but also
and the bespoke top.
Their bespoke sandstone stopper.
Oh wow, goodness.
That will cost them an absolute fucking fortune. But it's quite cool. So yeah, Manly have definitely got one of the nicest bottles.
Packaging.
Their packaging is definitely on point. So
yeah, really, really nice.
It's nice to have a marketing department, isn't it? Wow, yeah.
Marketing department of more than just crafty.
Yeah, exactly. No,
it's just marketing, but
so yeah, we've got your a sample. You were kind enough to send us a wee taster so we can have a crack at it.
Yeah.
I guess before we get into that,
Mm-hmm.
and as I'm having a bit of a nose of it,
Mm-hmm.
so Wildflower does beer differently.
Yes.
To your batch, to your Young Henrys, to Grifter, to Bolter, to all the other breweries anywhere in the country, actually.
Yeah.
You stand on your own because you make, you're using your own cultured yeast, foraged yeasts.
Yep. Yep.
Fermenting or and aging your beer in these massive barrels.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it's open ferment for the beer as well.
So, yeah, I'm happy to give you
Tell
a
us
quick
about your
primer
beer.
on it.
Tell us about your
Yeah.
beer and what Wildflower is.
So the main difference and the easiest way to think about it is the difference between a mixed culture and a monoculture. Monoculture beer is akin to monoculture bread, white bread.
Yep.
It's a Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the exact same organism replicated millions of billions of times, no matter depending on how big your fermentation is. And by conducting a monoculture fermentation, you get a very predictable and like a predictable result, both in flavor and in timeline. So that's your white bread. And this makes sense for production. When you start a batch of bread or a batch of beer, you want to know what it's going to taste like and when you're going to be able to start selling that.
Volume, scale, time.
Yeah. In the beer world, that technology only started to exist at the turn of the 1900s. And beer is, like a lot of spirits, it's one of the oldest. It's quite an old fermented beverage, potentially older than bread itself. But we're talking quite a few thousand years, and traces of it, well before 3,000 years from now. And beer, for the majority of its life, has not been a monoculture fermentation, and nor has bread. They have been mixed culture fermentations. And by mixed culture fermentation, it means you no longer have a single source of yeast. You now have a diversity of yeasts and bacteria that are fermenting whatever it is. And our beer is mixed culture fermentation. So it's easiest to describe it as a sourdough version of beer. It's not quite a direct analog because sourdough still is quite predictable. You can kind of manage the culture and have productive bakeries, because even making sourdough. What we decided to do at Wildflower was, as you can hear, as you can hear in my voice, I'm not from Australia originally, and I was always, since moving here, I've been struck by the uniqueness of the flora, particularly, also the fauna. But when I got into beer and was brewing, back in the 2012, 2013 at batch, a lot of these styles that we were brewing were American styles that were sort of appropriated to Australia, or probably misappropriated is probably more accurate. And it never struck me as like worthwhile. Like, why are we doing this if we have our own culture here, like our own microflora particularly, but also all of our ingredients and hops and whatever? Why are we not celebrating that? And so the brewery, Wildflower, was started in 2016, in order to really celebrate what comes from our backyard in Australia. And for me, the flavor profile, particularly in beer, and you might agree or not now with drinking the spirit, but in fermented beverages, is the fermentation profile. It's the esters itself. It's the yeast that you use and how you manage that fermentation from raw product, sugar, into esters and alcohol. And then carrying that through and harboring that on either side is kind of, from the raw materials that you choose, as well as how you handle things after. That's up to each practitioner. But really, the most important part is that fermentation. And so that's what we really, really focus on, is mixed culture fermentation, using entirely native yeasts and bacteria, foraged from native flowers here in New South Wales, mainly wattle, but hence the name Wildflower. Right. So all of our beers, if you come to drink any of our beers at Cellar Door, or you get them out there in the market, everything is fermented with non-lab propagated yeast and bacteria. Mm-hmm. Everything comes directly from nature, and then we work with it at the brewery like a madre, like a sourdough culture, and we just keep brewing with it, keep brewing. So, not to put words in your mouth, but really it's starting to sound, for me, and starting to understand a little bit more about spirits production, because I'll admit to being, when it comes to the distilling side, not like adequately trained there, and that's not my area of expertise. So I can't speak too much to the actual distillation process of this, and that's why we partner with someone else to take care of this. With Port Toms and the blending to do that. So I want, but I've always been interested in dunder pits in the Caribbean as these kind of continual cultures of like pretty rank, disgusting bacteria, to be honest. Like when it comes to dunder pits, that's pretty gross. But it's interesting.
Just the name alone sounds awful.
But they're so crucial to the flavor profiles of these products, and these distillers swear by them, or that again, or the non-boiling of a wash and allowing microbiology from the mash to get into the ferment to create a sour mash, and how that from the grain, to carry out the fermentation, you're carrying culture from the raw material into the ferment, and that markedly changes the distillate, the fermentation, and as a byproduct the distillate. But that was trying to talk about beer, but I ended up talking about spirits.
Well, but that's the thing, and I think it's something that we, Todd and I and Crafty, we certainly believe quite heavily in, is that to make a good whiskey, you start with a good beer.
Yeah.
A good beer is the absolute necessity to know that you're going to have a good shot at a good product at the other end, because what you're through the distillation process, you're concentrating the flavors, the esters, the essence of that beer into its spirit form, into its raw alcohol form. So absolutely,
chasing flavors the whole way through. So.
That's it. Absolutely.
Well, I've just been so surprised, every time I've been around a distillery, about the levels that they take that beer ferment to, ABV wise, smelling the beer and that ferment. Like, I can tell you, I'm not going to tell you where I've been, but I'll tell you I've been to quite a few distilleries now. And, I can smell it. The beer doesn't smell healthy in a lot of those places. For me, I wouldn't be drinking that beer. But also, like,
because
the ABV
what they're going for is
alcohol.
Yield.
Extract. Yeah, exactly.
They're just going for yield. Yeah. And they're sacrificing flavor for yield.
To be honest, that's probably what you need to do to not go broke.
Probably. It's a fine line, though, isn't it? It's a fine line.
And because I work with so many different yeast and bacteria, I do smell a lot of things in those base ferments. I'm like, ooh, gosh, like I wouldn't be drinking that. But again, this is not to throw shade on distillers. The other thing is time. Time of this fermentations. They're looking for generally yeast that works hot and fast, and generally those are not yeasts that produce really balanced ester profiles. Generally, the slower that they work, you're going to get a more complex profile. So I was shocked. This has only been recently, the 36-hour ferment is actually kind of long in distilling world. This is what I've been told. It's a couple of people. Well, and I think that's at least with the whiskey that I have in our glass right now to any other whiskey that's on the market.
We were talking to Waterford over in Ireland.
Yes.
On Monday. Ned and Mark, and I can't for the life of me remember how many hours it was that their ferment goes for, but it was something like a week. Fermentation. For their whiskey, so that they are getting the flavor, the essence of that whiskey. It is a low and slow ferment. very temperature controlled, purely to isolate and accentuate the grain profile, the grain flavor.
I drank some of that at Whisky and Ailment a few months ago in Melbourne, the Waterford. It was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So like I can understand, like, you know, and a week, yeah, I mean that's novel I mean, they're also at production. Like this product that we're talking about today, which we've talked around a lot. I mean, we don't have to talk about it as well.
We've still got time. We got time.
It's not in, you know, it's not a production product by any means. It's a curio at best. Really.
So all right,
anyway.
talking about the product, about the whiskey, which so your beers are, for the layman, they can be quite funky.
Mm-hmm.
They can be quite sour. They're like a table beer, farm style beer with that real funk, or that sort of, for me, it's like a something on the back. It's not a negative, but it's something on the back of your tongue there that I can only describe as it's got a nging.
Probably just a bit more acid than what you're used to, you know.
Yes,
when you're fermenting with a mixed culture, you get everything from nature. She doesn't just give you the alcohol producing yeast and bacteria. She gives you the lactic acid producing ones as well, which are a natural preservative to drop that pH a little bit lower, and the beer lasts more safely in barrel for transport. Or drinking, you know, without refrigeration at multiple times. So it's a total natural thing for it to drop the pH, and that's generally. I mean, some people call it beer sours, which I suppose that they do carry acidity, but a lot of people sours can also be things made in like kettle sours, really quick and very lactic and very sharp, and that's while we have acid, we don't shoot for that level, kind of character of like
it's a happy
but but you're right. Our beers are funky. When you go to nature to get yeast, like I said, she gives you the whole gamut, and so it's our job at the brewery to manage those fermentations, or really monitor is probably the best term. We're not managing; we can't really direct them. But when we ferment beer, so like I said, we've always started with that yeast. We also are really focused on the grain that we use, which has given us the like we were the first brewery to work with Voyager, like Stuart Voyager, who like now everyone in Australia distilling knows.
Everyone. They're a great sponsor and supporter of ours as well. Hi, Stu.
Good. Okay. I saw Stu on Monday.
I hope he's feeling all right. I hope he's feeling good.
No, he was up walking around. He's up anyway. That's a whole other story. But he was up at Gold Coast for BrewCon. So us and Batch were the first ones to use Stu's malts, and we have a major focus on that. I'm really happy to talk about that and go into the grains also in this beer, because that's highly specific as well.
Cool.
Sorry, this whiskey. I just did it. I usually don't do that. I'm pretty good. But you're right. Through the fermentation, they are a bit funky. You do get the full gamut. It's our job to manage this cellar that we have of about 250 or so wine barrel size barrels, so 225 to 300 liter barrels, and then a number of large format oak foudres. So we manage this cellar of brewing beer with those specific grains, fermenting it with our yeast, and then putting them down into oak, and then just watching and waiting for those to be within the window. And every single barrel is different. You know, we don't know when we put some into barrel when it's going to be ready necessarily. And so we just try to like monitor those fermentations and kind of harbor them down to a way where they're interesting and nuanced, but still palatable. And that's the thing that we always kind of focus on. It's like, it's all well and good to go make something really strange for the sake of it.
But you got to be able to drink it.
But yeah, exactly. And you want people to enjoy it as well. And anyway, also the same approach that we took towards the whiskey. But yeah.
So, I mean, look, yes, we are dancing around the fact that you have a whiskey now.
Yeah.
But I think it's we'll get to whiskey because there's so much leading up to the whiskey that is so fucking cool. And
Thank you.
and knowing from my conversations with some of our listeners and my own curiosity, you're doing a lot of things that have direct translation into spirits in terms of your yeast cultures, the barrel aging, and then the blending process of those multiple barrels into your finished product, the age and the time. There are so many synergies and comparisons all along the way to a whiskey production or to rum production that I find really quite fascinating. And we don't get to do deep dives into things like yeast very often.
Yeah, I think you should, honestly. Like, I mean, not that this can, I mean, I don't know. Anyway, probably not a lot of people are doing it. But
we
like,
will be talking to one of our sponsors, Mogwai.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so Mogwai,
One
one of our
pulls his
sponsors.
finger out and organises that.
Yeah, we've got to get Crafty to organise that one. But that'll be like, yeah, I can't wait to do a yeast deep dive on that. That'll be awesome. So,
well, I mean, I could tell those stories through the whiskey. I think it makes more sense to just go into what this is and then break that.
Let's do that.
Now we have the understanding of how we make our beer, but you know, your listenership is more focused on these other things, on spirits. So to start, I mean, again, as a caveat, this isn't my main game, and nor is this something that we're trying to push into. Like Dave from Archie Rose is a mate. Like, I speak to him probably at least once every second week. One of his distillers was at the brewery doing some milling trials on Tuesday. There's nothing in my desire that wants me to compete with that, you know, like, obviously on scale or anything. Like, just to be completely clear, this is not a move by any means from Wildflower.
Everyone's very supportive, even if it were, but we'll
not at all. So this whiskey that we have, which we've just simply called whiskey because I have a real honesty, I think, in the way that I want to talk about things. And this is a whiskey. It would be a hopped whiskey if you want to be really specific, I suppose, about how we would talk about it, because our beer is hopped to quite low levels. And by the time that this beer saw the stills, it would have been almost non-present. But anyway, there were hops in the making. This started off very much as beer. It was boiled and intended to be beer before it ended up seeing a still. So we're just calling it a Wildflower and Four Toms whiskey, and this is the 2023 release. This is a project that we are continuing. Like, again, not that we're making a move into it, but
we're not making a move, but we're doing it again.
We will. I mean, the intention is to release one bottling a year. Right? Cool. I'm not making a move, but this bottling was 300 liters. You know, 622 bottles. Like, it's almost laughable in terms of its scale, and even to be talking about it. So
not
honestly,
really.
No, and just in terms of
Yeah.
Really? Okay. Oh well.
What was the last IM bottling? The last one. IM2. What was that?
IM2 was only like 180 bottles, I think, somewhere around there. It wasn't huge.
Yep.
Well, these are 500 ml bottles too, so even more. Anyway, no. I mean, I respect that. I think maybe it comes from making beer, and you know, we just think about volumes differently. But we weren't. Yeah, it seems very small for us, and I like it like that. I don't want it to be very.
Since touch on Archie Rose, let's face it, they did have a small batch release, which was like 4,000 bottles or something. So. So it's a little bit relative.
Probably is small batch for them, you know, like it's everyone's thing. So this is a 22. So a bit, because the way that it comes about, this is why I can explain that there is new spirit being put down every year. So there is going to be, you know, releases into the future. This beer, I did it again. This whiskey, sorry. is blended from spirits distilled in 2018, 2019, and 2020. So 2018 was when we started doing this with Port Toms. It's comprised of spirit aged in American oak ex muscat from Clonakilla Winery. So Clonakilla, very good friends of ours, Denham and Bateman. They gave us their muscat barrels. We made a beer through them, our Christmas beer a number of years ago, and then we backfilled them with the spirit. There is some American oak ex bourbon in there, which is present on the palate and a little bit on the nose, which we thought was important to in the blending. I'm kind of getting to the end, but just in terms of talking about what it is, that was important to give some sort of touch point to some sort of a normal product a little bit in whiskey, like giving something that's like familiar, I suppose. In that. And then there's a decent component that's out of French oak puncheon. So completely neutral. Never seen our beer out of wine. So wine, but puncheons are 500 liter barrels. And so the surface area to volume ratio on those is quite blown out, and you don't get really as much kind of oxygenation through the staves. But interestingly, those were the barrels that for us kind of bore the mark of the beer the most, like of the base beer and the aromatics, which are, I'm sure y'all can already tell from nosing it as you've been doing, and I do it all the time. I just smell it. I'll smell this thing to death because it's so wildly aromatic. Versus what I would normally see in whiskey. And again, I don't drink heaps of Australian whiskey. I don't drink heaps of spirits. I can't have them around at the house because when I do, I drink the bottles, and that's just not good for my getting up in the morning with 3 kids. So I'm not the most widely drunk kind of.
You have more self-control than the average punter.
Well, you guys know, but like that was really the thing that started to, the aromatics of this are really the thing that started to make us consider it as a product on its own. So to get to where it started from, so I've explained how we make our beer, and the thing that I implied, but maybe not made direct inference towards, was the fact that the way that we make beer is wildly inconsistent. The yeast itself does a lot of different things. It is wild, and no matter how long we have it in-house, it does divert its own way, doing whatever the hell it wants to do. And
really, if it started being too consistent, then it's not what you're looking for, really, is it?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, we want that drift, right? Like, I'm interested in where the culture takes us, not where we take the culture. So I'm interested in those new flavors that are created through a different mode of fermentation or a different pathway. Like literally, Brettanomyces, which is a wild yeast, has the ability to do something called transesterification, where it will take an ester and rip it apart and rebuild it as a different ester. So this is an aromatic of banana. It'll rip apart and rebuild as an aromatic of pineapple. I'm not saying that's a direct that pathway, those two esters being built, but that's what it does when it runs out of sugar, right? It goes through it starts to just hold on to anything it can do to survive, and through oxygen ingress and esters being present, it can do that. It can go through transesterification to stay alive, right? And so if I was stymieing our culture, or kind of halting it at certain periods every single time, we wouldn't be giving the culture its day to do whatever it's going to do. And that's the whole initial part of the project, was of Wildflower.
Like going out there and rapes and pillages.
I mean, wild organisms do that. Like they really do. Like they have a predetermination to stay alive, like all of us. But
got this. Maybe this is the nerd in me, but I went straight to X-Men and the latent mutant gene that will do anything it wants to do in order to stay alive. And you've got your mutant yeast there.
Well, exactly, and that's what they do.
Tear the universe apart.
If we were getting lab propagated monoculture yeast, it's been taught its entire life that it gets fed at a consistent schedule. And if it doesn't get fed, it dies. That's all they do. And they create autolytic flavors.
So needy.
It's not nice. They really are. I think of them as fat Englishmen, really, because like they just know when their food's coming, and then like, oh, they're out and they're out. But also English yeast die quite often, so it's like it's always in my head. So they're really fast fermenters, and then they die right out. So things like fatty. Whereas Brettanomyces is much more, they're like hunter gatherers, you know, much more wolf-like, and just always going out. Anyway, I'm only describing that to say that these fermentations that we start, we have some understanding of the way that they might go, but we never have control over what's going to happen. And so this project started. We started the distillation because Poor Tom's is really brutal with their heads and tails. Like, is it heads and tails cuts? The heart, the heads and tails.
The hearts that you want, the heads and tails that they're
right.
cuts.
So their cuts are narrow because, like, in their gin process, right? And so they've always had a decent amount of heads and tails around, which are really great for contact sanitizing at the brewery. So.
Hence why when COVID came along, everyone's like, we've got fucking sanitizer at our ears.
Exactly.
Bottle that shit.
I mean, we've been doing that since we started. Is they've always saved their heads and tails, and we go collect a little drum, and that's what we use in our contact sanitizers. And if you come to cellar door and we clean your table, there might be a distinct smell of juniper on that table because your table has just been cleaned with gin.
Poor Tom's gin. Awesome.
But yeah, not necessarily the gin that you want to drink, because it has some other things in it. Yeah, but so we'd always been doing that in the sense of they've been saving something that's a byproduct for them, because I'm like, oh great, that's really useful for us for contact sanitizing. Never once have I actually never mixed it with orange juice and see how it went. But I've heard that people have done things like that. But I value my eyesight, so I'm not going to do that.
It's
keep away from the head, so I'm saying.
You don't want to smell too much of it either, otherwise you're going to burn those nose hairs off, and there goes your sense.
To be honest, I could use that with my nose hairs. Anyway, but we had this relationship with them, and they're friends, and they're around the corner, and. In 2018, we had built our cellar. So our barrel stock was full. We didn't have any more space to put any more barrels. And so it started to become the time where we had to start looking at barrels that had been passed up on blending multiple times and say, okay, there's something with the beer in this barrel that means at the blending table, when we blend blind. We don't know the ages of what we're tasting. But sometime we've passed this up time and time again. And now this beer is 2.5, 3 years old in barrel, and it's too oaky, or it's too funky, or it's too sour for us to enjoy. So what do? Well, the normal thing to do in the beer world when you're doing what we're doing, which by normal, there's like probably 10 to 15 breweries in the world that operate the way that we do. So the normal thing for the 10 of us would be to just dump it. And we did some of that in the early days, just to go, okay, we're cutting our losses. We're going to save the barrel.
That'd be a hard day.
It sucks. The thing that started to really change it for me was to say, like, actually, this is a waste. There is spirit. There's alcohol in here, but more so, there's grown material like barley and wheat that has, required sunlight and nutrition from the soil and water to grow. And then it's been malted, and then it's been transported into me. What a waste it is for me, and how consumer driven would it be for me just to say, because I don't like it, I'm just going to get rid of it, And so in 2018, we drove over a barrel, like a full oak barrel of beer, drove it over to Poor Tom's, and we decanted it directly into their still, because their still is 220 liters, oak barrels 220 liters, perfect, straight all the way in, and we distilled that. Now, over the next 5 years, or 6 years inclusive, that we've been doing this, we've realized that not everything that goes in the still, as you say, is going to come out nice, right? So
that's it.
So there was also like while in doing the project was born as going, okay, these barrels are not faulty, but they are not going to fit into the Wildflower flavor profile, which is quite narrow. Like we have quite soft acidity, not too oaky. There is a bit of funk, but not overly aggressive. And I didn't know what to do with these barrels that were outside of that. So we started distilling them. But amongst the time, we've definitely dipped our toe into like, oh, this one's going a little acidic, like a little vinegary. Let's distill it. You taste this. You taste the spirit. You straight away. You smell the vinegar. You can feel it on the. It's a different mouthfeel. It's a different profile entirely. So those trials were very once and truly like done. So we were like, okay, we can't put shit in the still and expect to get gold, right? It doesn't work like that. And that's what we realized. So we did though continue to allow barrels to mature out of our program, and not allow, like not intentionally, but when something became no longer suitable for our beer, but not faulty, so not sour, not necessarily not acetic, not microbial. Sometimes we get like really strange microbial growths going on in the beer, like kind of bacterial things that might send it kind of smell like Band-Aids or something like that. We tried that. No, that neutral spirits crap as well. So we, those now go down the drain as well. As any, we haven't had an acidic barrel in a while actually. But anyway, those beers we attempted to distill. The spirit was shit, so we dumped them. So we're not trying to do anything else, but it was more of like, how do we not throw away the work that's been done already, and maybe not necessarily just because it wasn't intentional to do this. Is there a way to make it a more stable product that in itself is interesting? So the beers, the washes or the ferments that were distilled to make this whiskey were made from organic New South Wales grains, fermented with entirely mixed cultures from New South Wales at around 5%. That's usually where we're at. Generally, wheat and barley mixture, a raw wheat and malted barley mixture. That's our main beer. Is Gold. Is those two things. Hopped to about 20-25 IBU, so relatively low, with a kiwi hop called Motueka, which is quite limey, which you get a lot in our beer. I don't know if it translates so much from the still. But as soon as we started doing it in 2018, we started to notice, even in the new make spirit. I mean, we had a number of cocktail bars like begging for the new make to put in spirit. Yeah, because it's so aromatic. Like it's unbelievable. And we didn't, both us and Portals were like, I don't really know what we're doing with this. I think we're just going to put it down into barrel. I had used barrels from the brewery from making beer that we weren't, we don't use American oak barrels. So we got them from a few wineries, including Conakilla. We used once in beer, and then the American oak character was a bit too strong for our beer. So I was like, okay, I have barrels. We didn't rechar them or anything. We just filled them right back up with the spirit. And so we'll just put it down and we'll see what happens.
Were they filled wet? Were they filled wet, or so you'd emptied the beer out and then just refilled straight away with the
washed with
wash,
with hot water, cool.
There you go. So Ian says, I've always thought the best whiskies come from the ideal balance of bacteria and yeast. I flavour slightly sour ferments. Keen to dabble. That word was, maybe it's all the whiskey I've had. Keen to dabble with hops one day. Indeed.
I would just say on that Ian, I mean, I would use low alpha noble hops, so not the new age stuff that's alpha acids of like north of 9%. That oil is gonna carry through a lot in the distillation. You want lower oil hops, which are generally like more traditional ones, more herbal and more grassy, and they will help your bacteria grow at a slower pace, which gives you a more balanced acidity. And that's kind of why we use hops, is a stymieing of like hops are antibacterial. That's why they're used in beer. You could use all kinds of bittering agents in beer, juniper, gentian root, rosemary, anything. But hops are antibacterial, so that's why they're used in beer. So we use them to slow the souring, while still allowing it to happen, but slowing it down. So
there you go.
what we started to notice,
that's
right. So what we started to notice was that these spirits were highly aromatic, and we thought, okay, well, let's put them into barrel and see what happens. And we did that for the better part of 4.5, 5 years, literally until the end of last year, end of 2022, that we actually sat down and tasted our barrel stock of all 8 barrels that we had filled. Like we're going crazy here. But we started to taste it and went, okay, like this thing that maybe didn't start off as an intentional process has borne something that is unique, at least from our perspectives, from Port Tom's and the Wildflower perspective, not only of a spirit from a mixed culture beer, that alone from the beer side has really only been done by one producer, and that was because of a faulty thermostat. So there was a lambic producer called Dre Fontainen. It's got a big 3 on the bottle. They had a neutral spirit come out in the late 90s that they had a thermostat issue in their bottle conditioning room, and a lot of beer was spoiled. So they took that beer and distilled it. But since then, there hasn't really been anyone using mixed culture barrel aged beer as a base for a spirit. So from a beer side, this is already an interesting thing. From a whiskey side, we're talking about pre-barrel aged wash, I suppose. How do you describe it? Before this
pre-oaked.
Pre-oaked, exactly. Before this beer saw the still, it would have had, on average, a minimum 1 year in barrel before.
Wow.
Which, whether or not that carries through in an oak thing, I don't think being oak necessarily would carry through the distillation, but the actual maturation.
Even why those flavors wouldn't come across.
True. Some of it would, some of it would have to.
Because hops definitely comes across in the distillation.
And we use neutral French oak, so it would be more of that creamy kind of oak character.
Neutral French oak.
Neutral as in not fresh. Neutral is from a winery. The winery has soaked up a lot of those fresh, kind of more sharp, characteristics. We're not getting exposed.
Generally, you get a sharp, spicy pepperiness from.
We're not after that. We're not after that at all. We want the home of the barrel, right? We want the place where it's held rather than the flavor itself. And for us, a lot of that comes through in texture, which y'all drink more spirits than me, but the texture of this is again quite different than a lot of other things that I see. It has a bit of grip in the middle, even at 48%. Like it's
quite creamy.
It's thick in a way. It's creamy. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. So potentially that is from the pre-barrel regime, but so from the beer side, it's interesting to have a beer of our production method go through a still, and then from the whiskey side, it's quite interesting to have something that is made from, I suppose, well, from what I'm understanding, made from the organic grains, fermented with completely wild yeast to a low ABV, and aged, and then aged pre-still.
Before it even hits the still.
Exactly. So the still at Port Tom's, which should be mentioned, which is one of the reasons I think that obviously everything has an impact on how this is, but quite interesting, the direct impact is that they have copper brandy stills, and they have, y'all will know, there's like plates in them, something about the other. So is that
plates
a plate?
in the column?
Okay. So these are this is a single pass, but because I guess there's plates, it kind of, anyway, again, not my
you've
word.
got your reflux happening, and basically you're doing more distillation through the column rather than just a single up and over
pass. Okay. Well,
that's my layman description of it.
Well, the thing that I'm pointing towards is that these are brandy stills, so they are made to ferment fruit wines and retain ester profiles of fruit wines. rather than being bubble plates, thanks again. Rather than being pot stills for grain distillations, which is great for their product, the aromatic spiced gins that they make. But also I think potentially was kind of fortuitously the right still for a very aromatic grain fermentation to go through as well. And so the thing for us was that we started to taste, finally at the end of 22 and started to kind of like show around to other people was that, hey, like we kind of wanted to take the piss about this a little bit. We kind of wanted to jeer, I suppose, a little bit at the whiskey industry, not as like just as like cheeky little siblings. Yeah, exactly. Just like, haha. And then we started to taste it and we were like, we kind of like this. Like it's kind of interesting.
Damn it,
and
good.
Yeah, I know. And maybe we need to give it its day. Like particularly the Poor Tom's crew, they were saying, look, they're not interested in going into whiskey. There's not something on their radar. It's quite confusing for a lot of distilleries who start off in their gin, and all of a sudden 6 years, 5 years later, they're like, actually, we've been putting whiskey down this whole time, and that's all we want to focus on. They're like, oh, what happened to your gin program? That's not the route that they want to take. And so it was quite their MO at Port Tom's from a brand identity is very tongue in cheek. And they really do like a bit of poking around at the industry. But when we started to release this, we both thought, okay, maybe if we took the piss, then it might not respect the product. Like unbeknownst to both of us, it's despite odds, it's pretty interesting. And I mean again, I don't drink enough spirit to really warrant saying one thing or another about its quality or whatever, but from everyone that I do respect,
we do have someone's honest opinion of it on the sidelines here. I need to say that this is possibly the single largest post that I'm about to put up. So
yeah, it's definitely the longest comment we've ever had.
Okay, I go, hey, how are you? Yeah. Oh,
so,
no way.
It used to be based in Sydney and is now in Adelaide. Am I thinking the right person? I'm thinking Inner West Brewers, maybe. So, for those who are not watching at home and listening after the fact, so Chaga Lopez says, this was an amazing, I've bastardized his last name. This is an amazing and very interesting whiskey. I've been a fan of Wildflower beer way before I became a distiller. Went to meet Topher. Was back when I was working at Nomad Brewery in 2017 and loved what they were doing with barrel and wild fermentation. Now, as I'm a distiller and also a fan of Port Tom's, I had to buy this whiskey and the result is great. Even though hops can be extremely overpowering when distilling beers, I feel that you guys have created a very nice contemporary whiskey flavor.
That's really kind. Thank you.
Well done, you. Now we actually had Marcel Thompson, who worked with Paul Tom's on their recipes. So that was back episode 25.
A while ago.
Back in 2022, we had him on.
Wow.
So he was fascinating to talk to. So, did you have any involvement with him on it at all, or was this purely Paul Tom's guys now that they?
No, so Gio, their distiller, was really the one kind of taking, like, again, like their gin, being the cuts were, I know from this, ridiculously brutal. Like there wasn't a huge heart middle, because that's the way that they like to do it with their still. And I mean, fair play to them. Like we weren't doing this for a commercial output, right? So the volume that we took from the still wasn't the goal. It was the flavor. And then mainly with the actual blending, that was mainly between Sean, who's like the bar manager. Well, he's run a number of bars. He's sort of the brand guy and design. He's an incredible palate, mainly cocktail. And then Luke Hipper, who's one of our employees who has a background in wine. And the two of them, we worked probably blending this for about 4 months, various iterations of different compositions, different ABVs, and really kind of figuring out what we wanted the initial release to look like. The barrels, are quite different. We did a tasting at Whisky and Ailment looking at the actual barrel composition, like the actual individual distillates in barrels, and then looking at the whiskey together. I really think we do have something that is greater than the sum of its parts here. But there are some barrels that are, share more of that oak characteristic, particularly those American oak bourbon ones. But so much is just this aromatic that, so many people when they smell it like that know our beer, they just smile and it just smells like your beer. Like it just smells, and it doesn't for me. It doesn't at all smell like our beer. But it's highly aromatic, which our beer is as well. And so I can understand where that's coming from. And so anyway, I mean, I appreciate the comment from Tiago, because it and apologies if I'm misspelling that, because we kind of struggled with where this fits, because I didn't want, again, like I said, we didn't want to throw it under the bus, but it didn't have, in some respects, it didn't have, I don't know where, like who to peg it to or what to peg it to really. And that's a kind of a scary place to be in a market that we don't know. I knew beer, I knew what we were doing with Wildflower by putting something that's not in the market at all into the market in 2017.
And that worked.
I guess so. I mean, a little bit. Like we still make a tiny amount of beer. It's enough for us, and we're very, very happy about it. But that's it. Yeah, and so I like the contemporary whiskey is a nice kind of comment, because we were really intentional about not wanting to ruin the texture and aromatic of this whiskey with oak, because or ABV. I mean, even at 52%, where these were put into cask, it was incredibly drinkable. Just a little too hot for my liking and a few of the others, and we thought that bringing it down to 48 at bottling just kind of gave a bit more of that breadth in the middle, and then you did see a little bit more of the fruit at the back end, rather than it being that warmth. But
it does have a very nice long finish to it. It's not a harsh. It's a long, gentle finish. You can feel the pepperiness, bit of pepper, bit of the aromatics on the back of your tongue there, and it's very nice.
It's reminiscent of musk wallies.
See, I need to Google all these. I need to go find them. Maybe if you could drop me a text message or something like that. So I'll be in Melbourne tomorrow. I'll go find a bottle of whatever that is. Of that one.
Yeah,
but
musk wallies. That works.
Archie, when I was toasting it with Dave, from Archie Rose, he sort of tasted it, really enjoyed it, had a laugh to himself, and I said, "What's so funny?" And he said, "It's natural whiskey, like natural wine has now hit whiskey, like there it is, and even with the branding and everything like that." And I was like, "Oh well, I guess that's not the worst thing."
Now you've got to also tell us a little bit about the artwork as well, which is quite beautiful.
Yeah, and apologies for the way that shows up on the whiskey sample bottle, the actual label being crusted over it.
What, I wanted that?
Yeah.
Did you notice though? I've almost finished it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So Todd gave me some. Yeah. And I don't know how much was in there, but I've almost polished off that tonight. So
this is the thing.
I hadn't tasted it before tonight.
It is very easy drinking.
It is.
Yeah, good.
For
I mean,
a aromatic whiskey, Like I've tasted a number of now beers, whiskey that started off as a beer, and there's a number of them out in the market, and I'm not a fan of any of them.
No,
I can confidently say I don't think the bottles that I have on my shelf will be finished by me deliberately.
When
in time, I'm like, here, give this a go, give this a go. But I have almost finished that. So,
oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, as a beer that has become a whiskey, it is different, and I'm not because of what Wildflower is. I'm not expecting a typical whiskey based whiskey from beer as well.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense at all at this point of the evening.
No, definitely. Well, I'll tell you. So the artwork on the front that is adorning the bottle, if you will, is by a friend of ours whose art studio was actually on the same street as us. Is how we met. She's an Australian artist who's a master of color. Like she actually just this year had her first piece of art installed at the what's it called? The Australian what's it like the museum?
Oh, this.
Oh yeah.
Temporary art.
No. Yeah, no. No, like the permanent collection of these, like in Canberra.
Oh, the Australia.
Yeah, the National Gallery. The National Gallery.
National Gallery.
So sorry. So she had her first artwork installed into the permanent collection at the National Gallery. Thank you. My wife knows a bit more about art than I do. Anyway, and she's she's incredibly well regarded, and she's an amazing artist. And her studio was on the street. She's since moved. But this artwork that's on the front is quite indicative of what she was doing a few years ago. These really big brush strokes using quite bold color and layering on top of each other. And this one in particular, I asked Gemma Smith is her name. I asked Gemma a number of years ago if we could license a piece of artwork from her to put on a label of our beers, because we're on the same street, and I kind of wanted to become friends with her, and that was a nice way of doing that. And she very kindly agreed at the time, and then we just never got around to doing it. All of our beers didn't warrant them, but it just didn't feel right for anything. And so when the whiskey came around, I thought to myself, it kind of came to me that maybe this, going to Gemma might be the right kind of move for a different product for both of us. So different branding, different position, like a different. It just looks quite different from one of our beers. I didn't want it to be just like one of our beers. So from the branding aspect, but also so when I asked Gemma if she'd be willing to do this, and it turns out she is quite enthusiastic about whiskey. So she actually joined us for a number of the blending days throughout this, and her input inside the product is also there, and so it's not just the artwork on the outside without her input. So another Marrickville kind of creative in this, but she gave us access to her entire portfolio, like every artwork she'd ever made or whatever, and just said choose whatever you want. Like honestly, whichever artwork you'd like to use, go for it. Which is like incredibly generous for us just to have the carte blanche of all of her work. And I mean, I don't get to keep it. I didn't get to keep this artwork. It's unfortunately, it's huge. It's 1.8 meters by 1.8 meters. The actual artwork.
Wow. That is huge.
But we settled on this piece. A number of us, my wife and a few of us at the brewery, without knowing the backstory, which coincidentally, this artwork is called Excess because it was made over a number of years by this canvas that was sat in the side of her studio. And when she would finish with her paint from a different artwork, there would still be some paint left on the palette. And it's not great to wash a lot of those paints on the sink. They create, like some of these acrylic paints are quite toxic. So instead of washing them down the sink, she would just iteratively over time, years, paint them onto this canvas over and over and pushing different colors into different corners and whatnot. And you can see that in the label. And there's some better photos of it online, this artwork, if you want to Google it. And so he said, how about this photo? Like this beer called, there's this artwork called Excess. And she just laughed and was like, well, that's perfect. Like it's exactly, she knew the story of the whiskey without kind of leading into the artwork. She didn't even tell us. So that's what this is. And Gemma's work is amazing, but she's quite interested and keen on staying involved with the project. So as the years go on, we will likely continue to license a new artwork from her each year, probably in this similar format, to just carry on the iterations, because we're not doing multiple bottlings, releases a year. It's just this once a year is the intention. When it's winter time, when everyone wants to be drinking spirits anyway, thing with her artwork. So it's been a really lovely connection with her, and really, I mean, forgive the pun, but quite an organic thing that's come about. And Max Allen in the AFR wrote a really nice review of the whiskey, and really focused on that packaging and the branding aspect of it being so different than what you would normally see. And I didn't, again, because I'm not necessarily in the world, I actually didn't consider how different it was to normal whiskey in the market before putting out there. But again, we've sold this wholesale to probably 10 to 15 bars and bottle shops across Australia. So it's not something that you're going to see sitting on the shelf anyway. I mean, if you do and you got a really great whiskey bar that has supported us, and it's it'll be somewhere in the back bar, and I'm sure it would stand out on the back bar against the flood of text and fontology that you generally see. But that wasn't the intention necessarily. It was there's a beautiful, what we think a beautiful product that was kind of a joining of two, businesses or creatives or kind of I don't know, booze plonkers on the inside, and we'd rather have something.
Enthusiasts.
Yeah, actually, now I come back to this, I'm actually remembering why I did it. Was because the brewery, like we know how to make work, and we know how to ferment it. That's what we do, right? We're really focused on that. So in this project, we've focused on that aspect of what we know how to do, and we know how to source grain. So that's us. For Toms, they know how to distill and they know how to blend. So we're just going to leave that to those experts rather than trying to do this all in house. And so when it comes to making something look pretty, we're going to leave that to the professional artist and not try to do that one ourselves. So it definitely was trying to the intention was to allow everyone's expertise to shine.
Well, I'm very sorry. I'm very hastily trying to crop out the image of the artwork, so I can flash it up on the fucking screen.
Oh, that's okay.
And I'm doing a really bad job of it. So I hope this doesn't completely destroy it. It'll probably be like postage stamp size when I get the thing uploaded.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. That's great. Yeah, that actually is a really nice photo of it, because it shows just a bit more of the depth of color. When you go to print something, there's just a lot of loss that you get. So this shows you the lightness in it, whereas the label, you get a bit more darkness in it. Anyway, it arrived at the brewery. Gemma very kindly lent us the artwork, which was very scary to have something that valuable in my possession / responsibility during the launch. So we had a showing for a weekend, and when it arrived, it was just like I don't know. It's fine art. Like you kind of see it, and then you see it in real life, and you're like, wow, it was really amazing. Anyway, it's beautiful.
Well, I did have to use it for
that's great,
for the cover image for the podcast for this episode. And I hope I did it justice in my my cropping and positioning.
No,
But
it's
yeah, I
perfect.
just thought it was too good not to use.
No, and you're inspiring me. I want to use that now for other things, but I would have to license it again from Gemma, and I don't have enough whiskey to do that. Yeah.
I'll put a link. Gemma, I'm going to put a link in the website in the podcast description. I'll put a link. I'll attribute.
Yeah. Diago's coming back to Sydney.
Oh, here we go. So late reply from Tiago here. So late reply, yes, very aromatic whiskey, great oak presence. I guess it also comes from the beer being fermented in barrels. Good barley backbone, very, very interesting. And also, Luke, you're almost right. Yes, basically, other direction. I said Adelaide. You went to Noosa. Yep.
Yeah.
I knew it.
Well, if you wanna come in and we can sit down and have a beer, and nip a whiskey together. Luke, if you want to pop over as well, or
we will
come around.
Most certainly.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to circle back to a question that came in the first 16 minutes of the episode that we sort of didn't quite get to. Mick Sheard. I'm Mick, friend of the show. As a baker of 25 years, I think it's super cool what you're doing. I've done a few experiments, but it's very fucking cold in Vic often. How do you control the temperature if you get any stall? So this is going back to the conversation about your ferment and using your wild yeasts and whatnot.
We don't get stall is essentially the answer to that. Our ferments don't slow down. I think a lot of that has to do with volume. Like when you're fermenting 2,000 liters of beer at a time, there's quite a bit of thermal mass there. So even if the nighttime temperatures do drop, the beer will maintain a decent temperature. In terms of controlling the temps, I don't control the temp at all. We actually don't have a glycol system at the brewery at all. There's no chilling anywhere. The only time the beer is chilled is before service, like chilled down to service temperatures in kegs. So I really don't like the idea of shocking yeast by chilling it down during fermentation. And again, we don't warm it up. We actually knock out our beer really warm. We start fermentation at about 28 to 30 degrees Celsius, which is really hot for beer. But the yeast profile and the way that our fermentation vessels dissipate heat means that those fermentations stay. They don't get like super ethanol driven, because some hot ferments can get hot in alcohol, but ours don't do that. And a lot of that's due to the yeast as well. So I would say if you're doing mixed culture fermentations and your yeast is stalling because of temperatures, maybe just move it inside if you can. If it's
put a blanket on it.
Yeah. But then again, if your ferment stalls one winter, I mean, this is me talking. Wait till the summer. Just let it ride out in the summer. Those yeast will wake right back up, and they'll probably finish the ferment for you. So if you have the patience, just ride it out.
So have you found that the weather conditions and the season have any impact on your ferments? Do you have to stop production during the depths of summer?
No, we just brew different beers. No, we brew different beers, and we know what to brew when and what we're going to get out of that. But we're also brewing beer year round and putting it to barrel year round. So we have like more diversity in our barrel cellar to be able to blend from. So when we make the majority of the beers that we make are blended from various ages of beer. So we're taking younger beers and older beers together to make what we want. And so it's actually quite nice to have those various seasons, the variation in fermentation profile through the season to be able to sort of celebrate that difference a little bit. So no, I mean, we don't, no, I just keep going. Celebrate the difference, yeah.
So we've had another question
sorry.
come in.
Yeah, good question. Sorry. Right.
So Ian says,
fermenting.
I may have missed it, but are you open fermenting or
Yeah.
gathered least from your local area? Also, heat mates, good work. Yeast trains, all helpful for the brewer. So, I mean,
so
yes. Where did you forage your yeast?
Farms, like definitely not national parks because you're not allowed to take flowers from those.
Like a swab, though. I mean, a swab would be fine.
No, I go quite heavy. The swabs can become really easily infected, so you got to use a lot of hot flour, like a lot of nectar source with wort to really get a healthy ferment going. I don't really do a ferment under 5 liters when we start that. We're going like, and that's, I mean, for like a capture, that would be about as small as they're going. So open fermenting, it depends on what you mean by open fermenting, Ian. There's two understandings of that word. One is like a pressure-less fermentation. So open fermenting is in like there is no back pressure, like it's not going into a spunding valve or some sort of blow-off valve. That can be described as open fermenting. The other open fermenting that you might be more speaking of is like an exposed to the environment English style ale one. Yeah.
I think that would be more what he's looking at.
We do somewhere in between. So we have
you put a lid on it?
Tanks. We have tanks that we allow to ferment out for a few days, and then like exposed, and then a lid on it. So it's not so much that the reason for that is not to, like, we do inoculate with our house culture we're not looking for the ambient air and microbiology to conduct the fermentation or to influence the fermentation. We're actually more interested in not having any back pressure on that ferment and allowing CO2 to freely flow out of the ferment to create a higher ester profile in the beer. There's an inverse relationship between hydrostatic pressure, like the height of a ferment, like the depth of ferment, and esterification in the ferment. So the higher the ferment, the less CO2 is able to dissipate out of the fermentation, so the less ester you get, because CO2 slows down ester production in yeast in fermentations. Whereas a shallower ferment, or one that isn't spunded or put into a blow-off valve or sees any kind of back pressure, will release its CO2 to the environment much easier. And so we are on that second point. So we do that less for a perspective of trying to influence it from the exterior air, and more from a desire to get a higher ester profile from those fermentations. Gathered yeast culture from your local area, yes, all New South Wales. Generally wattle ferments. So you take a wattle blossom. Right now is a great time of the year to go get flowers, because we're just exiting winter. So a lot of the nefarious bacteria that come with hotter temperatures aren't around right now. So and you have a lot of Saccharomyces that's still resident on yeast, like sugar sources. So go get wattle, rip off all the pollen and all the yellow blossoms, put them into something, and put some sterile wort on top of it, and it'll ferment. And I would say it'll be a nice ferment, probably 60% of the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you went for wattle. What about things like bottle brush and those?
Yeah, there's Grevillea in there. Yeah. We had to rebuild the culture in 2021. William, we use a shallow fermentation vessel. Yes, the highest depth is about 800 mil. Quite shallow for a 3,000 liter fermentation. We did a lot to start, and then we had to rebuild the culture in 2021. And so now the culture is mainly from wattle from a vineyard friend's property, a winery in Murrumbidgee, different from the Clonakilla one that we were speaking of before, and then a Melaleuca flower in the Southern Highlands. But you can Grevillea in bottle brush is quite an interesting one because there is documentation of language groups in Western Australia using Grevillea pre-colonization as not only a yeast source but also a sugar source for low alcohol ceremonial drinks. So the bottle brush would be put into like a trough, like somewhere where there would be like held water, and then soaked and then pulled out the next day, and new bottle brush put in, pulled out. So iteratively, kind of like day by day, dissolving sugar into this water source, increasing the sugar concentration, but also as a byproduct, inoculating it with those yeast. So this idea that we're doing this, I can confirm this from De Beers, by doing this.
That's
this
fascinating.
thing with flowers. I didn't know that this was a history in Australia before I started Wildflower, but now that I am, I've come to learn this through Max Allen, the same person who wrote this. I don't know if you'll know Max Allen, but a great wine writer and plonk. What would I call him? A documenter of plonk. In Australia, he came to tell me about this.
He knows his stuff.
Yeah, that's very much. Yeah, he knows his stuff. Anyway, so it's just fascinating.
So I wonder if just to throw out ideas of potential yeast sources when you're thinking about sugar content. What about those honey ants?
I'm not usually kind of putting like living organisms in my beer. I know people that have taken bees and like fermented off of them.
Leave the bees alone.
Exactly.
Leave the bees. The bees are fine. We need the bees. Without the bees, we are fine. But you've got the ants where they end up with the bulbous sort of honey, and our First Nation people would eat them. The arse of the ant as a nice little honey burst.
I haven't thought of it. You probably could. I'm just gonna say anywhere that there's sugar in the wild, there's also yeast. Yeah.
World of opportunity.
It's a special sort of yeast coming out of an ant, really.
Well, especially out of the arse of an ant, yeah. Well, look, it's almost 9:30. We've taken up a lot of your Thursday night. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing. I reckon there's a lot more that we could talk about with what you're doing, and I'm definitely going to be coming down and having a beer with you and having a chat. Doing more of a deep dive on all of it.
Let me know when you want to pop down. But really, thank you for the opportunity to talk about it on your platform, because it is something that we're not as attuned to is the whiskey drinkers of Australia, and being able to describe how we do it. And if someone's interested in that process, then having your podcast for them to use as a resource for that is really special, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to kind of effuse about what went into the bottle, if you will. So thank you.
Well, no, look, the pleasure is all ours. So everybody jump on to wildflowerbeer.com, wildflowerbeer.com, and of course check out the artwork from gemma-smith.com. There's some really beautiful work on her website there.
She's incredible.
Really, really cool.
You need a really big house, and you're really rich.
You need a really big house.
You need that. You need a really big artwork.
Yeah. I think this artwork could only work big. Go big or go home.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's really quite striking. So thank you all for joining us. We will be back next week.
Next week, yes.
Are we here next week? Who have we got next week?
Don't ask. I wasn't that prepared this time.
Useless.
I can't remember. Someone.
You're prolific. That's amazing.
Someone. We try to do every week. talking to someone. You know what? I can probably tell you who is in the calendar.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether you've confirmed them or not. So,
well, you can tell them now, and we can.
It'll be a surprise.
Give them some sort of guilt.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we had lined up transportation whiskey.
Yes, I'm pretty certain he's still on.
So, yeah, join us next week, Thursday, 8 o'clock. We will be back here doing it all again. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our newcomers who have obviously come just to hear you speak, Topher, because we've never seen them before. So you've obviously got a following, which is fantastic. So yeah, thank you all. Please like and subscribe, and we will see y'all next week. Hang around for our sponsors, please. Ta. Bye-bye.